Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to the Pipeline Report. Pastor Tim Karstkaden here with Zach Karstkaden. Also be joining me in just a minute. Eric Lawley, our producer today. We're so thankful you're with us here on the second day of February 2026. We're calling today's show Majority in Danger. The votes that are shifting now concerning the majority in the House and potential Senate, it's all up for grab in 2026. We had a special election in Texas this Saturday that flipped, and Republican district went Democrat. So that was another razor thin vote margin that we have in the House has got even smaller. So we want to talk about that today. We also want to cover some of the issues about justice in America concerning the events in Minnesota and beyond. And we're going to talk about some of the fraud that's growing and the revelation, because we really believe this is a season of revelation for that. And of course, we'll talk about Israel as always. Well, welcome to the Pipeline Report. Let's get into what the Lord's speaking to us today. Well, welcome. So glad you joined us today. And we pray that you are doing well and had a good weekend. We did as well. It's good to be back in the country. I want to thank Mac for covering while I was gone. And as we weren't, he was doing it by himself. He did a great job. And as we covered so many topics, and we had a great time in Germany. And now we're back in the saddle here, back in Louisiana. So let's get into our topics today. We have so many things to cover. But we want to pray accordingly to what God's saying concerning America in this hour. There's so much happening in the spirit. Israel, just a quick update. There is major preparations going on in Israel concerning a potential Iran a strike on them. We talked to our friends in Israel this past week, and they have told us that they're on the highest alert they know in their lifetime as far as potential attack from Iran concerning Israel. We know that Witkoff is in Israel today, meeting with Netanyahu. The coalition is being prepared. There's supposedly talks in Turkey will come about concerning Iran. Iran now wants to come to the table and have conversation. We know their history, which is always to stall, stall, stall. And we pray that the president will not be deceived by their actions. And remember, we've been talking about this here as well as on my podcast. The Iranian church has been praying for 50, probably almost 40, 50 years that this regime would be pulled down. So there's major prayer movement for this to happen. And that's what we have to see. It's not that we're crying out for regime fall, but we are crying out for liberty for the people in Iran and that whole region, because that's the number one nation that creates terrorism in the world. So it's a big, big issue. It's on the heart of the Father, but it's on the heart of the saints there as well. So we want to join our prayers with them and pray that God would give our government, our military wisdom on how to do this properly. All the assets, from what we understand, obviously don't work in the Pentagon, but all the assets are in the region. So everything that's needed to have a potential attack is there. The countries in the Middle East are posturing, make sure that they are protected from Iran, saying that America can not fly over their airspace. Saudi Arabia and others as well have said that. But that's okay. That's they have to, otherwise they become a target of Iran, and we have carriers. We don't have to go over their airspace anyway. That's not a problem. So don't worry about that issue. Let's pray accordingly for what God's saying there, and pray for Israel, the peace. The people are on edge. We've gotten in contact with them, and they don't know what's going to happen. Can you imagine? You're being told you're about to see the largest barrage of attacks. Some estimates are that Iran will send over 5,000 drones to attack Israel. Now, they did install the Iron Beam, which is a new technology around the country. This is an iron laser They call it the iron beam, but they can shoot a laser, and hopefully, it's been tried in some trials, but not all. But maybe if it works properly, it can just shoot down these drones. And it's a laser, so it's just one after another. You don't have to reload. You just fire, fire, fire. So we pray that that would be a blessing, a protection for Israel should these attacks come. We also have assets in other countries that they bases at that we're praying protection over the American soldiers as well. As you well know, that President Trump also has is building something called a board of peace. He's allowing nations to join this, and over I think you have to have $1 billion to join it. It's kind of a type of United Nations. I think he's absolutely frustrated with the United Nations, as we all are. Matter of fact, United Nations is close to bankruptcy because of their failure as an organization. Their whole focus has been for many, many years to just attack Israel. And that's what they've been doing and doing nothing else hardly. So that's another issue. And I know there's a lot of questions there about the spirit of Antichrist and the man of peace and all that. Let's not speculate that. Let's wait till we get revelation on that as we move forward. And so we welcome you to the topic today. I want to start in this Texas election here. And Zach, you can jump in here with me. There was a special election here in Texas on Saturday. A Republican district was lost to a Democrat. Texas Dem reelect Menifee may swear in Monday. And so this is a razor thin issue for Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. He's already thin, and now he's just lost another one. Now, what happened here was very unusual because it ended up being a very low turnout concerning the vote because there was nothing on the ballot. And so it was a flip here for that. So it may be an anomaly, and we got to pray this. Although there was a state Senate election there where President Trump had won by double digits in that district, and a Democratic senator won that seat as well. So this is just temporary until the midterms come November. It was just a special election, but it makes it much, much more difficult for the speaker in votes in the House right now. Especially, we're trying to deal with the budget, and it's very thin margin right now. As you know, it went to the Senate. They pulled out the ICE funding because of what's happening in Minnesota. The Democrats are using that. So, Zach, why don't we talk about the importance of a low turnout and what Trump's trying to do to solve that problem?
Yeah, Trump's recognized this, and so he's changing his strategy as doing something unprecedented as far as the administration goes from the White House. Is he's going on the campaign trail. Last week he was in Iowa, and he's getting a strategy together of figuring out where he needs to go to combat these type of races where there are vulnerable Republicans in certain positions. And this is, in the meantime, for Speaker Johnson, he understands this. He went from having a 2-vote margin to now a 1-vote margin, where Republicans, if they don't fall in line, then they can't really walk hand in hand and push either, Mike's agenda or, the Republican agenda, and more importantly, President Trump's agenda for them. So this is going to bring a challenge now, even more so than before, obviously, with Marjorie Taylor Greene stepping down as well. So things are very razor thin, and on the budget issue is they've signed a 2-week hiatus. Basically, everybody seems to be coming back into D.C. on tomorrow after the big winter weather that happened last week. Everything seems to have melted across the country. People came back to normal to a degree. Still freezing cold in some places. But now the administration is focusing on campaigning, treating it as, 2024, 2028 type year, presidential run, in order to combat the lethargicness that comes around midterms, which is where kitchen table issues don't really get discussed. And you'll start hearing that term a lot, kitchen table issues. This administration is focusing on that to look at the things that affect you, affect your life, whether it be, economics, hit you in your wallet, or still dealing with this fraud that's happening. And still this transgender issue stuff that's coming into play, and the fraud and things are being brought out more and more. And what's interesting in Minnesota is that the senator there, Klobuchar, is running for governor, and in her campaign ad, she says, we can't have fraud coming out of the governor's office, and we need to combat that. That's just disastrous for Tim Walz and the Democratic Party. So they're going to have to distance themselves. If they don't, Trump's going to hammer them home, and he's going to use other Democrats' words against them. So this will be very interesting to see how this plays out, and something to continue to pray for this administration and for the people in those areas who have a vulnerable representative, whether it be nationally or locally, to get involved, to get out and go vote and let their voice be heard in this season.
Yeah. So one thing I want to really pray for also is for Democratic congressmen, because of what they are having to go through if they don't pull the party line. I think that's a big problem right here. And because if they stand up and try to do anything different, they're paying a great price for that. So Senator Kennedy was on a Fox show this weekend, and he talked about this. Let me pull this link up here, and about what's happening to them, and concerning their battle trying to stand up for what's right. Let me get past this ad. Apologize. Rumble has ads. One more, and then we'll hear what he has to say about this. There we go.
Oh, you got it up.
Yep.
With Republicans, and that's the reception he's getting at home. What does that tell you?
It tells me that the Karen wing, the loon wing, Bolshevik wing, whatever you want to call it, Jackie, is firmly in control of the Democratic Party. And whether we ever pass a bill, a budget for the Department of Homeland Security will require our Democratic leadership to embrace adulthood, because that's what this discussion is all about. It's not, as it should be, a discussion of the efficient use of taxpayer money and funding ICE and DHS. It's just the Karen wing of the Democratic Party wants to defund ICE. They believe in open borders. They also wanted to defund the cops, defund police. We know how that vampire movie turned out. Now they've moved on to defunding ICE, and the Democrats, the leadership anyway, not people like John Fetterman, but the Democrats are scared of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we love our John Kennedy clips.
How this Miami
for
lipidologist.
sure. Let me get out of here. And I think when we look at this, Zach, why don't you speak to that about what he's saying about who's controlling the Democratic Party?
Yeah, the Democrats are kind of in their own civil war, obviously, as the right wing, the Republicans are as well, with the Candace Owens versus Trump base there in MAGA, America First versus is MAGA there, which I think is a interesting debate to be played out, because all this leads to what happens after Trump. And this is what Democrats are trying to decide, the fate of the country, which direction the country's headed. You have the AOCs, Ilhan Omar's, the Rashida Tlaib's, thinking it's going to go one direction and trying to pull it. You would call it regressives rather than progressive, as they're trying to claim themselves to be. Then you have the kind of stalwart Democrats who more than likely are mostly conservative but socially liberal, and they won't leave the Democratic Party, so they're going to stay there. They're going to fight and try to hold things together, kind of battling things out. So both sides are battling, but with the Democrats, it's common sense versus this lunacy, craziness that you're seeing play out in Minnesota. And look, these people in Minnesota are protesting with their children and use their children as shields. I think I talked about it last week. But where else have we seen this play out and those type of tactics used? Within Palestine and Hamas and Hezbollah. So they're following similar tactics, and we've played the videos before about how those same people who are involved with organizations over there are teaching and leading people on how to do these things. And there's a lot of funding that comes from, if you look deep back channels, from the same funders there, and this administration is looking directly into that. So the fraud that they're seeing in Minnesota, which now we'll talk about later, what they're today releasing on California, is very revealing. And I think as far as a kitchen table issue, Americans, and more so take Minnesota, for example. Minnesotans have to decide is, okay, do we want to continue to allow leaders who are okay with this going forward, this type of fraud, this mass fraud, where, if there's any issue in a city where, trash isn't getting picked up, bills aren't getting paid, you have bonds that need to be paid, but yet all this money is going towards this. And if there's anything the federal government can do and in control of that, they're trying to look into it and deal with it. And what's interesting is in a lot of these cases that get up to into the court systems, they're being ruled properly. I know a lot of people the last several years have been upset with how the Supreme Court has ruled on a lot of these issues, but they followed the correct procedures and saying you need to do it the right way. And right now, a lot of these Democrat lawyers and judges and things aren't following those procedures, so their rulings are getting smacked down and overruled from the Supreme Court, which is a healthy decision for the future of our country. And that's ultimately what this boils down to, is the direction of this country's going. How are we going to be ruled? Are we going to be ruled by which way the wind is blowing? Are we going to be ruled by a set of principles that can withstand the test of time and withstand the shaking that we're going through right now?
I had a prophetic friend of mine contact me this morning and had an encounter with a justice angel and said that epic discoveries or revelations are going to come out. And I think this has to do with revelations about abuse within the governments, and that's Zach was alluding to. So let's pray into that everything that's hidden that's abusive, and that God would reveal that where they've been doing it. And Los Angeles just got busted for what they're doing with the hospice program, and that's what Zach was alluding to. So let me play a clip here of what this is shocking as you see what happens here concerning the hospice program that's going on in Los Angeles.
One doctor billed the government $120 million in a single year, claiming to oversee 1,900 patients. With almost 2,000 hospice agencies, LA County has more than 36 states combined and 30 times more than either Florida or New York.
18% of the whole country's home health care billing is coming out of Los Angeles County. How is that possible?
And take a look at this map, a cluster of 287 hospice providers in a 2-mile radius, some in strip malls, unmarked buildings, even a wrecking yard and vacant lot.
All of it is just paperwork. I could fill that out in Kazakhstan if I want and get a hospice license waiting for me.
One doctor billed the government $120.
So there you go. So I think that's an epic revelation if you want to look at it that way, right there in California. I mean, speak those numbers again, Zach, so we can get a concept of what really is going on there.
So you have one doctor filing and saying he's over 1,900 patients with $120 million, which is 18% of all home health care, virtual funding that's being spent on out of California. And so you have major fraud there. And look, they're just starting to look into California.
Yeah.
Benny Johnson, the conservative reporter, who just did a 20-minute video. I haven't seen all of it, but I've seen the highlights of it so far and read the headlines, where he talked about in one day's reporting, they found $100 million in fraud, where they're doing, and remember the Nick Shirley who went to the daycare, the Learning Centers in Minneapolis, and found that there were no kids at the daycares. He's doing the same thing in California, and he's finding the same thing. He went to this one lady's house. I saw a video yesterday. She reported she had 14 kids in her care, and he went to her home, where it was her place of business, and she had 0 kids, and he was asking, hey, where are the kids? I'm trying to put my kid in, doing the same thing, and uncovering after uncovering after uncovering. And he also, couple weeks ago, went before a Senate or congressional hearing committee and talked about what's happening in Minneapolis, but then also uncovered to the public that there's even more massive fraud that he's been looking into as an investigative journalist of this type of fraud. And the Trump administration has talked about that. Trump has talked about that recently of this uncovering. And it's interesting is you look at where this is happening is Tim Walz, VP candidate, possibly looking at doing a VP again or running for governorship again or running for presidential election in 2028. Well, he's done forever. Gavin Newsom is now going to be challenged, and it's a point of integrity here where, look, you've said all these things, and a big one for Gavin Newsom is billions of dollars for this underground high-speed rail that went nowhere, that Californians are upset about. National money went there, that the administration is saying, hey, we gave you all this money. What happened? That is hopefully going to be uncovered, and now it's going to be up to the voter this coming election for governor to decide in California and in Minneapolis, do they want to continue to put people in office who are fraudulent and do fraudulent things? And that's more of the focus, where people need to realize is, look, okay, you can like a said candidate, but look at the results of what he is. And the question is, can said candidates, whether it's Cheon in California or Steve Hilton and the other gentleman running, can he make the kitchen table issues prevalent enough to get people out to vote to make that decision? And we'll have to see on that.
And so this fraud that we're seeing across America, Minnesota, Maine, Boston, and now California, other places, and you got to understand how this cascades down. This is major funding for these communities, which creates a base for them to promote their policies and what they believe. And it also creates voter bases based on allowing illegals to vote, et cetera. So this is huge. So if this card house, because it's made out of cards, if it falls, you could see a major shift in the way America votes and the way it is projected to be in the future. This goes back to what we talked about a year or so ago, 2 years ago, the Barna study that showed that America at its grassroots level is turning right and hard right. And this is the prophecy that has been given, that we would go too far right eventually. But this actually, the data's there, but it's not showing up in the polls when people go and vote because of these corrupt issues that are going on in our nation. And 2026 is, we're going to focus a lot this year on the Pipeline Report and in some of my podcasts as well, of focus on how important this election is, because this revelation of these fraudulent issues in our country is determining who's in office. And it's almost like it's a fraud because they shouldn't be there. That's not what the demographics say should happen. Plus you have gerrymandering going on as well. That's not how it should be. So we're not being represented properly. The House of Representatives, it's taxation with representation. The Senate's different, but the House is called to be that. And what we do is we have a House that does not represent America the way the demographics say it should represent. So we, if we want to look at us as prayer warriors and intercessors, we have a right to cry out to God for our foundations. We have a legal right in the spirit as well as a natural to cry out that these issues be revealed so that the true representation of our nation would be represented in the House of Representatives in America, and so that we would actually be able to stand on what is our values and what American values are, which I believe are Judeo-Christian values as a whole. And we're moving toward that. But when you keep losing elections because of the fraud, we have a real problem. Now, the Democrats, and Zach, you can speak to this, were brilliant in the last, I'd say 10, 12 years, if you want to call it brilliant. It's evil, but it's brilliant, is they went after every state. They went after every attorney general, every district attorney, and they made sure that they won those races. While the Republicans were focused on Senate, House, President, they were doing the down ballots, and you guys are probably tired of hearing us talk about that. But we talk about it all the time because that's where the rubber meets the road, is those down ballot issues. They began to capture district attorneys, attorney generals who have to enforce the law. Look at Minnesota, the Attorney General Ellison there. Look at New York City, Bragg, the DA. They do not uphold the law. They subvert the law, even breaking constitutional law, in order to not bring cases to court. And so a lot of the times when they like Waltz, they're going to find out he's been involved with that. But what court in Minnesota is going to actually prosecute? And we have to be realistic about this. He may go to court, but the DOJ is going to have a very difficult time of winning a case because of that. Now you can keep appealing, but eventually you got to see how many appointments that Biden has made and Obama's made through those years, those people, that was another issue of what they did. They appointed activist judges all across America so that when it comes to their courts, it dies in those courts. And that's where we're in Psalm 73, that if we keep looking at the wicked prospering, we will fall. So we have to look to the sanctuary of God and cry out and say, Lord, the wicked will fall. And we have to pray accordingly.
Yeah, and look at the Trump administration and the moves that they're making now. This week, Trump came out and said, look, we're not going to help police this stuff, these riots and everything going on in these blue cities because of the ICE trackers and trying to get ICE agents to remove their masks and doxing them and putting their lives in danger, as you see what's been happening in Minneapolis. He's basically saying, and this is his words, he said, we'll help them if they want help, but they have to ask us and they have to say, please. I mean, it's hilarious that he legitimately says that. So we see this play out with the Trump administration because he knows, look, fine, you want to have this chaos. This is what you want. This is going to happen in your cities. If we remember back to the Summer of Love and CHOP and all that, those things that happened during 2020, where did all this stuff take place? In blue cities. And this is what these people vote for. So he's saying, look, if this is what you want, this is what you're going to get. And we've said it before is, look, this separation between blue run cities and states versus red run cities and red states, they are diametrically opposed. You're starting to see a shift in even higher education where people, the Ivy League quote unquote schools, are losing its glamour and its luster, and people are starting to go into their local state schools or even going across state border lines to go to other state schools because they're seeing they're getting a better education, if they even get an education now, because the top companies are no longer going to these universities. Thomas Sowell always talks about, the famous economist out of Stanford, Hoover Institute, talks about, if you ever see a world problem, just know there's an Ivy Leaguer right behind it, because it's usually an idea that they came up with. And this is somebody who came up through the ranks of those systems and understands them very well and understands who these people are and has taught some of them to a degree. So, and I don't mean to just knock that. It's obviously someone's opinion. But now we have to look at is, okay, if this is where things lie, and again, I bring up this term kitchen table issues, if these are the kitchen table issues that they're willing to fight over, and look at New York City, people talking about trash not being picked up because of the winter storm, ice cars being in Upper East Side, being buried under snow, in the dead of winter when it's going to take months for that stuff to thaw out. This is who these people elected. And so you're going to have to see this stuff, unfortunately, fall out for people to realize it's too little too late.
And here's CNN's take on the population shift that could affect this election and the elections ahead. I think we need to really pray into this, because just because there's population shift, if you ask me, doesn't mean that equals votes. But he makes a good point here. This guy's quite hilarious on CNN.
Inflation trends that really should set off a flashing red siren to Democrats nationwide while bringing a big smile to the faces of Republicans nationwide. Why do I say that? Because take a look at the big population gainers versus the last census back in 2020. According to the latest population estimates that take into account the population mid-2025, look at this. The biggest population growth this decade, all 5 of the states that Donald John Trump won in 2024. Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, and of course the great state of Arizona, where I spent my New Year's Eve. I love those folks out in Prescott, Arizona. These were the biggest gainers in terms of population compared to the 2020 census. Now, it's not just a red state boom. This is what we're looking at. We're looking at a red state boom here. But it is not just a red state boom. We're also looking at what I would dare call a blue state depression. Because who are the people? Who and where are the people moving from into the red states? Well, they're blue states. They're blue states. Take a look here. The lowest domestic net migration this decade. All 5 of the states that were won by Kamala Harris in 2024. Look at this. California, Harris's home state. New York, where I'm coming from right now, of course. Illinois, New Jersey, and of course the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is a bastion of blue liberalism. These are the states that folks in the United States are moving away from and into the red states, which is propelling a red state boom. Now, this is interesting, right? But it could...
Okay, so we can go on. He's got some good points. I like his take on this. But again, sometimes when they move, they also take their voting habits with them. Texas is a classic example of that, especially in the Austin area, Dallas area, where a lot of these people that have migrated there from these blue states, they vote just like they lived in a blue state. So this is something we got to pray. But I want to say this: I believe when they come under those states, which actually have, I think, a better spirit over them, I believe their hearts can be shifted. And this is back to not just change your outward, but change the inward. And that's what we need to see, is an awakening of the hearts. Once they realize, look, hey, this state's thriving here. They're prospering. What do they believe? They believe in Judeo-Christian values. They honor one another. They don't go into woke and all the different issues that those blue states go. And that has to be our hope, is when they come, that they vote. Zach, you lived in Florida. You saw a lot of New Yorkers and Northeasters move there. It doesn't always translate to votes, does it?
Not necessarily, and sometimes they more likely will bring their politics that cause them to move with them. I saw that in Florida a lot. South Florida just had retransplants from New York and the Northeast, but they were bringing their exact same politics and voting records in there, as you're seeing the mayor of Miami go Democrat for the first time in quite a while. And then in North Carolina, I saw the opposite. Is you had people, I met a lot of people from the Northwest and a few from the Northeast, but majority of the people that I ran into and we ran into who had younger families, they're from the Northwest. And they said, I asked them, like, hey, North Carolina, like, they didn't have any family associated with the region. They just wanted to move there, and they're like, I had to get away from the craziness of the politics there. I mean, they're open about it. I mean, in the past in South Florida, these type of people, they would like try to hide it because of their friends and their jobs and et cetera. But in North Carolina, it was like an open thing where they were just like shouting it from the rooftops, like, this stuff is crazy, because they started having kids and started realizing, like, oh, you mean they can affect my child? They can do this stuff? And they would tell us that. And so they're, in a positive sense, what this guy's talking about is reinforcing what is already there in a good sense. But obviously, being that it's CNN, what he's not telling you is what we're talking about is they're leaving California, going to Austin, Florida, and other all these other states, Arizona, North Carolina, and they are bringing their liberal policies with them, and they're voting it because they're not. It's ultimately, you talked about it yesterday. It's a heart issue. Yeah. Talking about how we need a heart issue change in D.C. Well, the same thing goes for the people, because the reality is their heart's not changing and realizing what caused them and what decisions that they made and or didn't make. Whether to vote or not to vote, which caused them to put the state or the city that they were in the position it was in by how they voted. And that's the importance of why we say vote, go out and vote, and understand who you're voting for, et cetera, because the simple decision of going out to vote and who to vote for and putting somebody in this position and that position can have a long-term effect, because they can do more damage than you can ultimately realize or not realize. And it could be a lasting effect that is very hard to unwind. And we're seeing right now the Trump administration do its best to try to unwind this stuff. And we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah. And for you guys that live in those red states that they're moving to, be on the wall, pray. And let's pray that they create relationships with the right people there, that they connect and see that we're real people. A lot of times it just takes a relationship to say, hey, maybe I've been wrong here. I've been off a little bit, at some level. I remember a prophet one time, he talked about he was on a plane and he was talking to somebody, a Jewish man, and they got into the abortion talk. And after a conversation, the Jewish man looked at this prophet and said, I've been talking to the wrong people. And because he brought up about how the Jews were dehumanized and how that's how Hitler killed them. And they do the same thing to aborted babies. So sometimes it just takes that right conversation, that right relationship that can shift. So let's pray for those red states, especially that he listed there, that there would be a relational built there, or a building where the heart does get changed, what we just shared there. Okay, last topic here we want to talk about is the court case, the riot that happened in the church in Minneapolis. As you saw, Don Lemon, I don't want to call him a journalist, the activist, was arrested for his actions within the church. Now, remember, Don Lemon has become a basic irrelevant person in the media world. and he's desperate. He's desperate to rebuild a platform for himself. So he used this. Now, the Deputy Attorney General yesterday was confronted by Stephanopoulos about this issue, and this is a response of the Deputy Attorney General.
So when do you believe that Mr. Lemon crossed the line from reporting on what was going on to criminal activity?
Conveniently missing from what you just showed, George, is the appellate court and a judge on the appellate court who said just a few days later there was clearly probable cause and it wasn't even a close question. So, and by the way, a grand jury, which is what our system has set up to determine whether probable cause exists, concluded that there was probable cause. That indictment is now public. Everybody in this country can pull it up and read for themselves and see what the grand jury found that Mr. Lemon did. I am not going to comment on the charges specifically because it's not appropriate, but it's interesting that we talk about the First Amendment right. You have a right of freedom of religion, which is just as important as any other right that we have. And George, I don't know if you've watched the videos or read the indictment about what it's alleged that Mr. Lemon did, but if anybody in this country thinks that that is, quote, independent journalism, I would like to have a conversation with you. Now, he's obviously has a very good lawyer. He can raise defenses in court to the extent he wants to, but nobody in this country should feel comfortable storming into a church while it's ongoing and disrupting that church service and thinking that we're just going to stand by and let that happen, because there is a statute that does not allow that to happen. It doesn't matter if you happen to be a former CNN journalist. It doesn't matter if you're a rioter. It doesn't matter if you think you're peacefully protesting. You are not allowed to do that.
And I think that, wow, praise God that, something like that was said here. I think that's something that we got to talk about, because what they did there. Now, this was Marjorie Greene on Bill Maher's show, which, she's unusual, but this was a great point she made.
They arrested Don Lemon. Somebody went, yes, like good. I don't know. I
didn't hear that.
It's not good to arrest him.
I'm going to say he violated the FACE Act. He went into a church, disrupted their worship, and then later in an interview compared them to white supremacists. That's not journalism. That's activism.
But does it warrant getting arrested?
Disrupting a worship service, stopping people's right to worship God, that is violation of the FACE Act. And under the Biden administration, pro-lifers were sent to prison up to 11 years for praying in front of an abortion clinic, and they were convicted under the FACE Act.
Boom. Well, she nailed it on that one, because of what happened to the pro-lifers. And we saw that some of them, I think, were in their 80s when they got arrested. Now, President Trump had to pardon them because they were in prison for just praying outside of an abortion clinic. And I saw another pundit made a point, a conservative pundit. What about if we were to storm an abortion clinic and start interviewing abortion-minded women that are in there to get an abortion? Do we have a right to go in there and do that? No, we don't have a right to go and invade a business like that. Even though I think the business is demonic, it doesn't give me a right to do that. And I think she made the valid point. And I think, and the rest of that show, he was stunned because he didn't expect that to come out. He just thought, it's just a little guy, kind of little crazy guy, Bill Lemon, Don Lemon doing this silly thing. But the fact was, as for us as in the church, this is a huge issue, because we need to have the right of freedom of religion to have our meetings not be disrupted by activists. Now, and I think there was another one said, if they wanted, they could have gone out in the street in front of the church and protested there. They have a right to do that, but they do not have a right to go into the building. And of course, the comments that he made, if you listen to his comments, it was clear he was a part of it. He pushed the agenda, the whole thing. He was not a journalist. He was an activist. And let's not forget, in the J6 group, that journalists, when the Congress was open and went in, some journalists went in there just to film what was going on, and they were arrested for doing that as well. At least conservative was. Liberal ones, most of them got away with it. Biden did not arrest them. But I personally have a friend that went in there to do nothing more than film. As he saw the people going in, he said, I need to film this. And he goes in, and he was arrested and he was prosecuted. He got pardoned under Trump, but he was prosecuted for that. So if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, as we say. You can't have it both ways. You have to be fair to all journalists in the situation.
Yeah, and to talk about those two scenarios is remind me of his name, Steve
Baker.
Steve Baker. He now works for Blaze because Blaze hired him because they wanted to help support him. At the time, he was an independent journalist because he was let go from his previous employer because he just freelanced. And he happened to be in D.C. that day. People went in, so he followed him with his cameras, et cetera, stuff. And then FBI went after him, all this stuff. And on this flip side, and because here's the difference, is Steve went in unknowingly what was going on and was just filming and being a journalist. Don Lemon, on the other hand, per his own testimony, went to the events where before they went into the church where they talked about what they were going to do and was a part of it. And then when they got into church, he was one of the people telling the pastor what to do, yelling at the congregants along with everybody. Like he was right alongside of them. And again, yet another tactic that we see happen in where else? With Hamas, in Gaza, with Israel.
Yep.
Same tactics. Yep. I want to point that out here because that's very important for us to understand what is going on. And while it's naturally linked to the same people because the same people are training both sides in Gaza and Hamas and in this instance, Minneapolis and a lot of the blue states, but it's also spiritual as well. You're seeing this rise up where doors have been opened and things are kind of out of control here where there's this spirit here that's starting to take over. And so it's one of those things where the church in those areas is going to have to rise up. They're going to have to deal with this unwinding, repenting of allowing these doors to be open and ultimately walk in that inheritance as the Lord has for them in the coming seasons that we have. And it's ultimately got to be a change of heart, as we talked about before. But we have to point those differences out. All right, of the Steve case under Biden and then this Don Lemon case with President Trump. And look at the differences and understand when they say these things. Says Don Lemon's going to make a lot of money off of this. Yes. And I mean, he's already starting to go on tonight, the late night shows and do his rounds and get popularity back because he's now in the news. And all news is good news. Doesn't matter if it's bad in Don Lemon's case. And so he's going to ride this wave.
And I know a grand jury indicted him, but you're going to go before a Minnesota court. And therein lies another problem. So let's pray, obviously, that justice would come about. But I think if nothing else, the attention came, and I think it's becoming very relevant, evident to the left that you can't disrupt a church service. For us, that's a good sight, a good sign for us in that sense. So I know that the DOJ just arrested 2 more people from that. This is a clip, saw the news clip for this as well, where the Attorney General Bondi sends a warning as she reveals 2 more rioters have been arrested to storming the church. I think that's up to 4 to 5 or 6, or I can't remember how many now that they've arrested in that case. And then also, this is coming out. This is in Fox News. I saw this one where there's an admission. Minneapolis Teachers Union chief admits elected officials in anti-ICE signal chats. Now, if you remember, President Trump's some of his cabinet got in trouble for some of their comments on Signal, and now they got these copies of these Signal. Signal is an application you can text on. It's encrypted. It's what the government uses anyway. And so now they have records of politicians were all part of this anti-ICE uprising and beginning to get involved in that. So let's we're winding down here, but let's talk about why they're doing this. Look, if you think these people really care about these illegal immigrants because they're criminals, most of them are the ones they're going after. They don't care about that. They're desperate. They have nothing to come against Trump about and the Republicans. And so this is the only thing they can grab hold of to stand together and fight. Remember, in the kingdom, you look for a moment or a place of unity, and they have found a unity on the dark side to use this event or these events to rally against Trump. They do not care about these people. They really do not. You've seen some of the videos where they say, do you think illegal immigrants should have a place in America? Oh, yes. Should they be able to stay anywhere? And then they say, well, good, I have a couple. Can they stay with you? They do those videos. And every one of them, those liberals, no. I can't do that. So it's easy to talk about open borders when you got protection, when you're protected from any illegal activity. But the fact is that they really don't care. It's just a liberal issue, not a liberal progressive issue. So that's what we're talking about there, what's happening in this situation. So we need that to be revealed, and we need justice in those areas.
Yeah, and there's local representatives who are high-level people in this, and this is very similar. And we saw this in 2020 during the virus issue. Is that they wanted people to report on their neighbors, and this goes back to a tactic that the brown shirts would have used in Nazi Germany, where you would report on your neighbors if they hid somebody of a certain ethnicity, and it was not necessarily frowned upon. So they're trying to create this environment of where your neighbor, kind of tattletales on the other neighbor and is watching and other things. And it's what they're trying to do is they're trying to create the thing that they're saying of the right of, well, they're above the law and all this stuff. There is a two-tier justice systems where they're trying to recreate their own government inside the government and things that are happening here. And you're talking about major universities getting involved. You're talking about, I think, in New Jersey getting the government getting involved and tracking ICE agents and places where they're going in their city to take them out, basically, and to dox them. And these people are not nice, loving, peace people. I know, the President Trump is kind of walking back the stances of things that happened in the Alex Peretti case. But the reality is these people were violent. In this instance, he was involved with a violent interaction with ICE moments before then and days before then, to where he ended up having a broken rib. Same thing with the other lady who ended up having a loss of life in her car because she used her car as a weapon. I mean, these people are not just like protesting. They're being activists. To a degree, they're obstructing in an investigation and being violent about it. I mean, that is not a protester. That is not what is protected under the Constitution. And the moment you take your words and take it into action that is violent and costing someone their life, you have broken the law. And the Trump administration with Tom Homan is doing their best to try to deal with it. And that's why you saw Trump, I talked about it earlier, say, look, we're going to stop helping these places where they don't want us. If they don't want us there, we're going to not be there. And his ultimate point, the ultimate goal is this. He wants to go after the known criminals, the known rapists, the known murderers, drug traffickers, etc., who are within the limits of these jurisdictions, but also more importantly within the jail system of these cities they're being protected by them, catch and release, etc., things when they should be holding them so that DHS agents can come in and investigate and deal with the situation properly. But because they're not, the local authorities aren't following proper protocols, it's now putting ICE agents and DHS agents at risk, and ultimately our country at risk, and innocent civilians at risk. Because you remember the Lincoln Riley Act and names like that, and of the girls who have lost their life because of these poor decisions by these leaders in these blue run cities and states. And so that's ultimately what it comes down to, is that they live in this alternative reality where open borders is a good thing. And there's going to be more that comes out about it, and we'll talk about it here leading up to the midterms because it's an issue. And you could probably talk about your experience in Germany as well. Yeah. But I mean, if anything, we look at Germany and see the path that they've gone, whether it be from World War II to even now with some of the policies that they've made in the recent history, to know what to avoid, right, but also understand the spirit of things that's happening in this reoccurrence of things that we've discussed.
And I had a word yesterday in the service about Virginia. The Lord showed me Virginia was going to be a part of a civil war in the spirit, where the Lord, I heard this clearly. The Lord said, I'm declaring war on this spirit, and Virginia will be a ground zero. And there was an article that came out, and they're already seeing it. For some of our friends in Virginia that are watching, this is the new governor. This new centrist governor goes full California on day one. Yeah. She campaigned as being a centrist, a moderate, and immediately when she became the governor, she started doing executive orders, everything. And I think this is going to be a big issue in the midterms, because some of these Democrats you got to get elected. Okay, this is the reality, and I tell Republicans that too. Sometimes you don't need to be so pro everything you are on the right, you have to get elected and then be wise when you get in. That's diplomacy. It's just part of politics. And then when she got in and she did it this way, one of the things that's dangerous here is now poor Virginians who thought I'm voting for a moderate, a centrist, and she is not. She is a far left. She goes full California day one.
Yeah, she was an avowed socialist before and she hid it, and now she's revealing herself. But a positive in Virginia, to your point of what you prophesied, is that they're finding in the Supreme Court through the redistricting maps in Virginia that it was pretty much done illegally.
Right.
And what they're going to find is they're going to strike all that down and they're going to have to redraw the maps again. More than likely is what it's looking like, because what happened is there was a single judge, rather than waiting for the case to go up and back down and up and back down because of the quote-unquote shortened timeline, just ended up making all those decisions himself, and that is unfortunately for him highly illegal. And so now they're going to have to walk all that back, which hopefully that can be done before the midterms, go back to what it was before. But then the people of Virginia have a decision to make, because they were going in the right direction, and then now because of some actions by a appointed judge, as we've talked about before, have skirted the rule of law here to allow the maps to look a certain way, but then also you have politicians playing games like this.
And remember, if y'all will pray for the Supreme Court, there is a case in Louisiana, which we're part of, where they gerrymandered a district based on race, and that's illegal. I understand in past history after the Civil War, you almost had to do that in order to allow minorities to be in office, but it's never been legal. They just did it to be fair. And so now that case is before them. They do not think they're going to rule before June, which means that it'll stay as is come the midterms. But that's a huge case, because if that case flips and the Supreme Court says you cannot build a district based on race, that affects California. That affects a lot of other states that have gerrymandered. Maryland, there's many others that the Republicans have a lot of numbers in those states, but they have zero representation because of this gerrymandering issue. So that's a big one that's going on there. A little good news as we're shutting down here. I want one big point before we leave, so don't leave right now. I'm not a Grammy award winner thing, but Jelly Roll, which is he's a country western singer, he made a statement that was just so powerful at the Grammys yesterday, and it really has to do with politics, because he brought it out. I want to just play it. It's a minute. It's an amazing clip that he did, and it's a testimony for all of us of what Jesus did for one man's life.
I know they're going to try to kick me off here, so just let me try to get this out. First of all, Jesus, I hear you and I'm listening, Lord. I am listening, Lord. Second of all, I want to thank my beautiful wife. I would have never changed my life without you. I'd have ended up dead or in jail. I'd have killed myself if it wasn't for you and Jesus. I thank you for that. I thank you for my label, Broken Bow, Country Radio, baby. What's up, y'all? Oh, Republic, John Manili, we did it, baby. There was a time in my life, y'all, that I was broken. That's why I wrote this album. I didn't think I had a chance, y'all. There was days that I thought the darkest things. I was a horrible human. There was a moment in my life that all I had was a Bible this big and a radio the same size and a 6x8 foot cell. And I believed that those two things could change my life. I believed that music had the power to change my life and God had the power to change my life. And I want to tell y'all right now, Jesus is for everybody. Jesus is not owned by one political party. Jesus is not owned by no music label. Jesus is Jesus, and anybody can have a relationship with him. I love you, Lord.
Wow. What an amazing statement. And I think for politics, I mean, we need more messages like that. What an amazing statement by this young man. I think it was good. It was not awkward. It was from passion. And it was like a testimony at a revival meeting where what Jesus did for a guy who was in jail, drugs, about to give up his life. And then he said, you know, he's not a politician. He's for both sides. I think that was such a beautiful statement there.
Yeah, one thing to know, he's going through a journey, and he's somebody to pray for, but not model yourself after.
Yeah. Okay, so Zach and I talked before we came on here, and this is a really touchy issue right now in the prophetic movement, and we felt we wanted to address this today. As with all this fraud that's being uncovered among prophets in America, or so-called prophets, whatever you want to call them, with all the controversy, and you're watching the Sean Bowles and all these different people that are being uncovered, the term that's coming out is called data mining. And for us, we're a prophetic community. We're very prophetic. You've watched us, you know us. And I did one little podcast about it, but we in the past, I know in the 2020 election, we actually played some videos from a guy named Chris Reed, who was at Morningstar at that time. And we know he had the moral failure, and now it's coming out about alcohol, drugs, and this data mining issue, which is, I had to Google to figure out what data mining was. I didn't even know what that term was. But what they do is they go on social media sites and get information about individuals for personal prophetic. So they'll get their name, their address, where they live, maybe what their family members and so forth. And then they use it in a meeting or online or whatever, and use it as a point of word of knowledge in order to build themselves up, or for whatever reason. And sometimes they don't even prophesy. They just give words of knowledge, which I've always brought warning to, because I don't ever want to get overexcited about words of knowledge. That information is known by the devil as much as it is by the Lord. And it's just information. That's what it's knowledge. The key is, do I prophesy after that into life? And so these guys have been doing that. The videos we played on Pipeline were never personal prophetic words. We didn't even get into that because that's not what this program's about. This program is about world events, national events, and the main things we use Chris videos for, when we played them, was for his national prophetic dreams, his world prophetic dreams. Now, those can be judged. Did they happen or not happen? And we were talking before we came on. One of the things he prophesied about was that Biden, I guess while he was in office, he would die and Putin would die right after him. Well, that didn't come to pass. Now, that wasn't a dream. That was a prophecy he gave. Now, we can all miss it. I'm not here to beat him down. I can be judged that way too, as a prophetic person. But we tried to stick with his dreams, and some of them did come to pass. So it seems to be that there's a gift.
Kamala Harris one.
Yeah, the Kamala Harris one. There seems to be a gift there, but he got into a place where he began to move, and now more and more evidence is coming out on his personal prophetic. Okay, I want to bring that out. You can't data mine about world events. There's nothing to mine there. So it's either you heard it or you didn't hear it. So we were innocent in the sense we didn't know this stuff was going on behind the scenes. We were just trying to build a message about what we feel God was trying to say in America and for the world. And so again, some of those that we played did come to pass. So I just we wanted to clarify that as a ministry, and we hate that had to happen. And it's a sad thing that's going on right now in the prophetic, as far as the revelations of some of the evil things that have been going on behind the scenes. And pray for the whole movement. They want to throw us all under the bus on this issue, and we want to be careful that we give everybody opportunity to let this thing play out, and that justice would prevail in this issue. If you don't want to say anything to that, Zach.
Yeah, and if you guys have paid attention or haven't, it all started a couple weeks ago when a gentleman, YouTuber by the name of Mike Winger, who came out and brought some evidence forward in a almost 6-hour video on YouTube on Sean Boltz, and really going after Bethel, and in particular in Cheyenne, because Sean Boltz called them his mother church and his leaders on his board, et cetera stuff. And so he brought some evidence out and really just went after the entire charismatic movement, naming Bob Jones, even going after William Branham shadily, but not bringing any evidence, going after Patricia King, Randy Clark, Bill Johnson. He mainly went after Bill Johnson.
Yeah.
And Chris Valentin and Bethel on how they handled it. At first, immediately, Chris Valentin and Bethel were defensive and said some things that, talked to John West about it. It kind of tone deaf. But through some conversations that they had with their leadership board, what they're calling their young leadership board, because I guess they have an older leadership and a younger leadership board, they both came out, and I think it was Dan Fairley, were on stage for all three of their services, morning, afternoon, and night, and apologized publicly to the world. And is bringing about a good integrity and repenting for things that they knew that they didn't deal with. I mean, things that were happening in their own church to their own leaders. And there's a lot to dive into there. But, I mean, you have to honor them in this instance of they're taking the right initial step to acknowledge that they made a mistake. That hasn't been done before in my lifetime. When you go back and look at the Todd Bentley stuff and now the Sean Bolt stuff, I mean, Todd Bentley twice, and because Bethel even made some mistakes there. And so it's refreshing to see it. Now, will they play it out? Will they deal with things? There's now possibility of lawsuits and et cetera things, which is why Sean's doing what he's doing and et cetera things. But that's not the point to say. But our point to say is look, we were praying into things and going back and remembering and looking back on things is, look, we were saying, look, all right, here's what the believed prophet and the prophet was saying is we want to pray into this. We want to, seek the Lord and walk in step with this. Is this Lord? Is this not? We want to test this. And we always talked about the test of time will be proven right. And in this instance, this is one where, in a sense, some of it was true, some of it was not. And also kind of something you talked about yesterday is there are conditional words as well. And even Chris would acknowledge, look, a lot of the stuff he said about global politics and national politics was conditional, and they needed to be prayed into, and they needed to be, and I know a lot of people can get cynical about that. But that's those are the words, and a lot of them he was putting out there, and the ones we were kind of looking at and examining and praying into. But when somebody has the failings that he had at the level he had, I think, and even Sean Bolt's here more so with the Bethel instance with Mike Winger. I watched it, the 6-hour video, watched it all. A lot of it is conjecture at the very least, and one wouldn't hold up in a court of law, but there is some things where, because Mike Winger for at least close to a decade has been scrutinizing Bethel, he knew a lot about, and there are other programs and other people who have kind of called out the same thing with Sean, because Sean and Chris were doing the exact same thing as far as data mining. And so it's sad to see in the prophetic movement, but I think it's also a healthy cleanse that's needed moving forward. And there are a lot of people who want the same thing. Look, they want Bethel to do well. They want the charismatic spirit-filled movement to walk into its calling of holiness. And this is why Jeremiah Johnson is going on his prophetic reformations tour. You have Ken Ham, you have John Thomas with Streams. They're doing the same thing. I mean, they have a whole podcast on it, and it's all about purifying the prophetic, and it's stuff that's needed right now. And even Mike Winger and a lot of other people who are saying things, people can challenge and question whether the motives or why they did what they did or how they did it. But it's like, look, even going back to the Todd Bentley stuff with Rick Joyner from a couple of years ago, this is stuff that needed to get out and was being ignored. And this is why Jeremiah Johnson wants nothing to do, even though he's in the backyard of Morningstar, wants nothing to do with Morningstar. If you didn't know, Kannapolis is not too far from where Morningstar is located, and Jeremiah Johnson's right there, and he wants no association with it, which is sad as far as the body of Christ and the kingdom goes. But he's like, look, this is a major issue. This needs to be dealt with, and unfortunately, it happened again after Todd Bentley with the Morningstar and Rick Joyner, and it's just sad to see from my generation's standpoint of view. And I think what the Sean Bolt thing is we don't understand is the younger generation of how much they looked at it. I think Chris talked about it, Valatin, the week before last, about how they had 18,000 Bethel School supernatural ministry students that went through it that he might have touched. And there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that Sean Bolton might have touched in all their webinars and everything and around the world. And so this is a growing effect that will need to be cleaned up and dealt with moving forward. And it's very sad to see.
And I watched Cheon's statement at his church service yesterday, and he clarified some things. When Sean joined the HIM movement, HIM, they call it, when you fill out your application, you say, who's your primary accountability covering? And Sean Bolt's listed Bethel, not him. He was secondary. They were secondary. So when Cheon confronted Sean said, well, Bethel's my pastors, my leaders. He then sent it back to Bethel, and he told his leadership they would no longer be using Sean's stuff, nor allow him to have any platform. He apologized to his congregation. that he did it with his leadership, and he should have come to the congregation and done the same thing. So he did apologize for that. So there's a lot of apologies going. We're doing our portion today because we did play some Chris Reed clips that did not come to pass. Some did. And like Zach said, some of them weren't conditional. So we just wanted to clean that up and understand that we were unaware of any of the scenes back then. That's before any of the revelations about his issues came out. So we were unaware of that. And so we just want to clarify that.
Yeah, we've had to do this. You do remember we did it in 2020 because the same, not to this degree, but to a certain degree of the integrity of the words that were being put out, more so the accuracy. It was ended up being, you know, your Reddit QAnon prophets,
right?
And so it's just it's very sad to see, but. And John Thomas does a great teaching about this, about how sometimes you have to mark these people. And this is Old Testament and even some New Testament that Mike Winger's even using scriptural basis to do. And there's a time to try to deal with these things behind closed door that, whether you believe the story or not, was allowed to happen or wasn't allowed to happen. And eventually people just kept having questions. It's okay, I went to them, it was ignored. I brought people, it was ignored. Then you bring it before the body. And I think that the separating difference here is, this is what Mike Winger's saying, is you're looking at, in the Matthew 18 example, is you're looking at a private sin versus a public leader sin, and that's kind of where he's coming out, and Streams talks about this, John Thomas does, where, look, if there's a leader like this and you know it, you got to let your people know and flag them. And that's where the Mike Winger and a lot of these people calling this stuff out are saying, look, like, this affect people. People were making decisions off their lives, off the prophetic words and the words of knowledge that Chris was giving, that Sean Bolts and other people were giving, and that's the challenge. And there's some culpability with individuals, but that's a separate issue. But the reality is people were taking it as a thus saith the Lord word, and it was a thus saith Facebook. And that's very sad that had happened.
And we've done that in our ministry. We've marked people that we caught doing things like that prophetically. So we're not afraid to do that. And I think it's healthy for the body of Christ that we do that. So, well, sorry we went a little over today. We thought that was an important topic to make sure we clarify that. And we're doing our best to vet all those that we would play a video of or comment on prophetic. That's our heart's cry. So thanks for listening today. We'll see you next week, next Monday on the Pipeline Report. Thanks for being with us.